Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're super happy to have virtual and RL friends of Fiddlehead here gathered today. I'm David Hubert. I'm the co-director of creative writing here at the University of New Brunswick, and I am acting editor of the Fiddlehead. Yes, okay. So I'd like to begin. Yeah, we've got all kinds of, as well, Fiddlehead staff here today. And as well, Sue Sinclair, the editor, who I'm acting for. So it's great to have all the staff members here, and I'm super grateful for their work. I'd like to acknowledge the territory here. The land on which the Fiddlehead operates is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Wolastoq, Mi'kmaq, and Pescataway peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognize Wolastoq, Mi'kmaq, and Pescataway title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge all of our sponsors, beginning with the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of New Brunswick, the University of New Brunswick, and our launch partner, WordFeast. Also, feel free to send a shout out to the American Sign Language interpreters with the NB Deaf and Hard of Hearing Society, who will be offering their services via Zoom. You can buy a copy of the autumn issue, which we're celebrating today. The autumn issue, super snazzy. If you're here in RL, you can buy it right here, and you can also buy it online through the submittable page. The virtual participants can do that. The link to the purchase will be provided in the Zoom chat. So these readings, by the way, we'll have 4 wonderful readers reading tonight. We're super excited to have our Fiddlehead contributors and friends here to read with us. And at the end of the hour or so, we will have a Q&A. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We would love to receive your questions. Joanne Elder will be monitoring the Zoom room, so she can field questions from our virtual participants, and I can field questions from our in-person audience. Okay, so our first reader is our RL reader, Fawn Parker. So I will just introduce Fawn. Fawn Parker is the author of Set Point and Dumb Show, and What We Both Know, and the forthcoming autofictional memoir, Hi, It's Me. Her short story, Feed Machine, was nominated for the 2020 McClellan and Stewart Czerny Prize, and her novel, What We Both Know, was nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. Very pleased to have Fawn here as a doctoral candidate at the University of New Brunswick. Fawn, as well, is represented by Cook McDermott Agency. So please, everybody, join me in welcoming.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry that I'll be facing primarily away, but it's nice to see you. I'll turn for my second and fourth poem. So I'm going to read 4. Hopefully not take up too much time. If I type it, it was under 10 minutes. The first one is called Bluff Charge, and I should just learn what that means. What does it mean? It's when like a bear goes to attack you, but it doesn't. It's just, well. Oh, to throw keys to swing bold, chaperoned and shrouded in shrapnel and chardonnay, shined like brogue, polished and perforated, not tied over tongue. Oh, to be young and dream of Venus, to embrace the limb of the city, its scurrying organ pierced with sudden steel, the muscle ripped from water by its lip, skin stomped in buckets, poison for brain. Oh, to be carnivorous. Oh, to be a grape. Feed on sin, shriveling in the rectory. White wine and oyster, pearl beneath lid, gun in paper bag. booze behind trapdoor, father, not father, then father again, to pray at base of phallic stem of glass, horseradish, red wine, vinegar, parmesan, white wine, and oyster, ionically architectured vulgular offering. Patient is Aphrodite's in the room with us right now. In morning, scrape ancient breakfast from his dish, suckle on bruise of hangover, holy light of sun, skulk like, slink to marital mattress, sink into sea, shrink into shell, wake clenched as salted leech, puckered in divot of wrong side of bed, O river through city, treated water reeking of ejaculate, throbbing lighthouse of our husband, beam upward through skyline, are we not siren but mother, having sufficiently shirked seduction, deflating in the rectory, releasing some clotted criminal? They call her miscarriage, doctor, and litmus, wily them to name a thing not meant to be, slumped over podium, she with soft shell, inferior to consistent supply, those tailed things, amphibian, Darwinian in progression, suspended in sickly slime, many in number and potent. She's grown only to meet some sad potential, risen from scalloped shard, dry-egged and Mary blue, metastasized and failingly therapied, and they say she's the one who carries the empty briefcase like it's not empty. This is called Horseman's First Rodeo. I, workhorse, once rode, muscular back of beast round field, sans harness, paid cash for equestrian promise of anachronistic aim, tendon gliding over vertebrae, satisfied, closed shop, hauled ass to water, drank with ease, evidence of horse without horse instinct, chosen incorrectly on impulse, misplaced bet, besides, mastery only ever depressed a person, sitting idly on spangled saddle. This is called woof, although my poetry workshop told me not to call it woof. It's called something else. The exposure therapist says he understands me. At 15, he was attacked by a dog. He too hoarded small anxieties. He too remained indoors. He hung a muzzle from his bedroom doorknob, slotted his keys between his fingers and made a fist. In midlife, he has learned to let go. We speak over the phone, and I imagine him perfect or covered in scars. It depends how my day is going. I described to him the sofa in great detail. It is stuffed with down, ornate, white, and firm. It is where my mother died. It is not exactly where my mother died, but dying can take time. He asks for more. He says he cannot picture it, but almost. What do you like so much about the sofa, he says, though he knows it is never about the sofa, as it is never about the dogs. He's never heard of her when I tell him Joan Didion kept her dead husband's shirts in her closet in case he needed them again. The exposure therapist makes me unwrite a painting of a naked woman, soft and asleep. For 40 minutes, I look at the thing, crooked, and then we say goodbye. When I vomit during a session, he says, good. Some people think their heads are going to explode. When he was 15, they let him stand in the doorway while they injected a substance into the dog that did it. This, he says, is when he first fell in love with exposure and response prevention. He says, unlike him, I never got the closure of seeing the body or of seeing the body go into the ground. He tells me he's forgiven himself. He forgives me too, even if I don't. For what, I say? The exposure therapist has 2 dogs who bark in the background of our calls. See, he says, I'm not lying about this stuff. He makes me poke a pin through a sofa cushion. He makes me rip out her journals and break her plates over my knee. He says I shatter glass with a sense of timid preservation. He says I clean up my messes too soon after our calls. He is insatiable, knowing what he knows about the sofa. You do this, he says, and you won't need me anymore. The pills don't work, and neither did the talking, and the talking, and the talking. I have to drag the sofa to the curb. This is the bitter bread of failure. But, I ask him, what if I'm not looking when they come to take it away? And this is my last one, called Sickle Bill Abandons. I'm sorry to the interpreter for that title. It's a bird with a long beak. She sips from spade, pollinates only post-pollination, or robberously with gold-costumed feet post-prime, a womb image, reverse uterus stand in horizontal inflorescence. Approximation, the bird of paradise grows exclusively this way, co-inhabited, counter-queened, an all-yellow, all-hormone, large measuring monarch. A petaled thing, unaccounted for as a nameless nudity, until named, Strelitzia, an archetype of a gold or curtained item. It archives this moment, gives rise to plumage variation, gives rise to one's passions with which to distract, to regard as souvenirs, anomaly, as in gratitude, turned over in a manner to de-preserve, infinitely degrading, as something does have to go on. To be plucked, she would make but some mournful noises, not quite language. She could not act properly with right grammar and ease of communication before flapping wing beats in the interior, across dark hallways composing her texts of bed linens, hoarding letters in the den of the feeling of the thing, memories of one who dined on the silk of her body and then migrated, de-imagined her children. She lost her allure, the damp basket of her nest, the sweetness of her limbs and feathers gone heavy and limp, fluttering a final time, a memory of the dead flail of a wing's rage that drowned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Fawn. That was certainly stirring. So our next reader is Corinna Chong, whose wonderful story, Love Cream Heat, appears in the fall issue. We're super excited to have Corinna here tonight. Corinna Chong is a graduate of UNB's Creative Writing MA program. Her first novel, Belinda's Rings, was published by New West Press in 2013, and her reviews and short fiction have appeared in magazines across Canada, including Grain, Room, Riddle Fence, the Metal Hat Review, and Prism International, and also Fiddlehead. She won the 2021 CBC Short Story Prize for her story, Kids in Kindergarten. Yeah. Her debut short story collection, The Whole Animal, will be published by Arsenal Pulp Press in spring 2023. She lives in Kelowna, BC, where she teaches English and Fine Arts at Okanagan College. Welcome, Corinna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody at the Fiddlehead for inviting me to participate today. It's really nice to be back at UNB, if only virtually. But I'm excited to read this story for you. It's called Love Cream Heat, as already mentioned, and I'm just going to read the first little bit of it for you. When Louisa pulled up to the house, her mother was standing on the driveway. She was holding a green cooler and an electric carving knife in one hand and an antelope head by the horn in the other. "Mom," Louisa said as she opened her door, "you look crazy." "Hi, sweetheart," she said, setting down the cooler and balancing the knife and the head on its lid. "Give us a squish." Her face wasn't red or puffy from crying, but as they came together for a hug, Louisa could not help but notice that her mother's fingers under the nails were blue. "How you doing, Mom?" Louisa said into her mother's woolly shoulder, which emanated some vanilla-choked perfume that she'd never smelled on her before. "I was just cleaning some things out of the garage," she said. "No sense waiting for you and Cole when there's just so much." "Cole's not here yet?" "Sunday morning," she said, "the day of the funeral." Bastard, Louisa muttered. I know. You probably heard she isn't coming. Cole had moved to Singapore with his wife 8 years ago, suddenly ordaining Louisa as the recipient of daily phone calls from their mother about suspicious moles, suspicious neighbors, computers that hate her, and the latest garage sale finds. Their mother's resentment over being robbed of her favorite child expressed itself in her refusal to call Mei Ling by her name. I'm happy you're here. It's a little unnerving being by myself in this big house. She passed the cooler and the knife to Louisa and hooked her arm around the neck of the antelope. Now help me get this stuff to Goodwill, please. She gestured to a half-empty box sitting at the curb. Mom, poor people don't want Dad's dead animal heads. Well, I don't know. I can't exactly throw them away. They remind me too much of him. She turned the antelope's face toward herself and studied it at arm's length. It's the eyes, I think, so pensive. Louisa knew that grief came in waves, but it bothered her that her mother seemed so resigned to her father's death already, as though he'd been long gone for years. They busied themselves with sorting through his things well into the evening, and by the end of the day, her mother had yet to shed a single tear. Once Louisa had retreated to her room for the night, she took out her phone and Googled stages of grief. Most of what she found confirmed things she already knew: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But was there such a thing as progressing too quickly? Louisa doubted it was truly acceptance if you skipped some of the stages to get there. Her mind began to wander back to Missioner. She'd spent the entire drive to Saskatoon like this, drifting in and out of memories of their time together. What she'd loved most about Missioner was his rice cooker. It was the most intimate part of their relationship. 2 cups of rice, 3 1/4 cups of water, 17 minutes. It was the only thing they could cook. So sometimes, after sex, they'd sit on the carpet in his dorm room and eat it by the bowlful, topped with chunks of butter and soy sauce drizzled from little plastic packets. The steam from the cooker hung in clouds around them. What would they talk about? She couldn't remember now. But it hadn't mattered. Common interests were of little concern back then. It was all about fucking, even though fucking was 5 minutes of missionary on a single bed, she practicing her breathiest moan with each clumsy thrust. Missioner always pulled out at the last moment, despite her being on the pill. Sorry, he'd say, finishing himself off while she wiped up with a sock. I apologize for my cat. Sorry about that. Now, after almost 20 years, Louisa found herself longing for Missioner. She'd barely given him a thought after they'd parted ways. She knew he'd married the woman he began dating right after her. Rebound Raylene, Louisa and her friends called her. Raylene was pale and wafer thin and considerably taller than Missioner, so they made a comically mismatched pair. They'd only been 21. There was a good chance they were divorced by now. He'd stopped posting on Facebook years ago, which suggested he didn't have much to be proud of. She closed her browser and clicked on the Facebook Messenger app. Hi, Missioner. It's been a while. I hope you're well. I'm in town and wondered if you might be interested in catching up. I know a good place for rice, winky face. She stared at the words for a while, reading and rereading and imagining what Missioner would think when he saw it. Was it too provocative or not enough? She thought of that sly little smile of his, the one that always came on his face when they were taking off their clothes. In the end, she deleted the winky face and hit send. Cole wrestled with his tie and jacket in the car on the way to the funeral home. His plane had been delayed, so he'd swept in only just in time for the service. Must be nice. Louisa drove, eyes on the road. Yeah, this is nice, he replied, smoothing his hair in the mirror. Do you know what a nervous wreck I've been? I've had 0 time to process anything. Me neither. Our mother is in full purge mode. It's weird. It's like she feels liberated or something. It was a long time coming, I guess. Cole sniffed. It took Louisa a few moments to realize that tears were dripping silently from his cheeks and landing on his shirt. Cole, she said, it's okay. You'll ruin your shirt. It's not fucking okay, he said. After the funeral, Cole wolfed down 3 egg salad sandwiches, a pile of browning fruit, 2 oatmeal raisin cookies, and a slice of lemon meringue pie. Louisa couldn't eat. She dabbed at her swollen eyes with fraying tissues. So many sandwiches, their mother remarked as the guests filtered out. We'll be eating sandwiches until next week. She clapped her hands. Cole sat in a chair in the corner of the hall, his legs stuck out in a V in front of him. You okay? Louisa asked, tapping the sole of his shoe with hers. He said nothing at first, staring off into the distance. Then, is she blue? He asked. He was looking at their mother as she hugged the last of the guests. You noticed too? Her hands? Yeah, her hands, but also all over too. Look at her face, for Christ's sakes. It was true. Louisa hadn't noticed until now. It was probably the black dress she wore, or maybe the fluorescent lighting that was bringing out the blue tinge of her skin. You ask her, Cole said. I'm just exhausted. Louisa rolled her eyes. Because you're the only one. You don't understand, he said, rubbing his face in his palms. He looked up at Louisa with bloodshot eyes. Mei Ling is pregnant, he said. Oh, she said, pulling up a chair next to him. Wow, that's great. No, Louisa, it's not great. He rubbed his face again. Okay, sorry. We agreed not to have kids. Neither of us ever wanted them. Yeah, I know. So was it an accident? I don't know. She says it was. But then I found 6 unopened packs of birth control pills in her bedside table. Geez, she said. But wait, how do you know? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean she deliberately stopped taking them. They could just be extra. I know, but I just have a feeling. Plus, she refuses to get an abortion. What? Why? I don't know. She said something like, now that the thing is in there, she just can't bear to get rid of it. What a bitch. Cole glared at her, not helping. Well, what are you going to do? I don't know. He sighed. Maybe move back here for a bit. Cole, come on. You're not thinking about abandoning your pregnant wife, are you? Fuck, just because she's pregnant, now she can be completely manipulative and I just have to go along with it? She's your wife, Cole. You made a vow. Since when do you take that stuff seriously? I don't. I just mean that this isn't just some girl you knocked up. You're not 18 anymore. I didn't sign up for this, he said, standing and raising his hands in the air. Plus, my dad just fucking died, and I was way the hell in another country. Their mother turned to him then, raising a hand to her mouth. The lingering guests made a quick exit, eyes downcast. Cole stormed out after them. And that's all I'll read for you today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Corinna. That was really, really wonderful. Such an engaging story to hear read aloud as well. So I'm very pleased to introduce our next reader, Tolu Oloruntoba. Has been a physician, editor, and project manager, and has lived in 3 countries. His literary work combines existential analysis with historical and contemporary critique. His debut collection of poetry, The Junta of Happenstance, won the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry in English and the Canadian Griffin Poetry Prize. Tolu lives with his family in Semiahmoo, Katsi, and Kwantlen territories known as Surrey, BC. His second collection, Each One a Furnace, was published by McClellan and Stewart recently. Welcome, Tolu.
Thank you very much for that introduction. What's my sound like? What's my volume like? Thank you.
Can you talk a little more?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as loud as it can go on the
Even
TV.
me can hardly hear. I see play the back.
So can you?
If you could speak a little bit louder, that would be great.
How about now?
Oh, up.
How about now?
It's good. Yeah. It's audible. Yeah, you're gonna have to try to sort of err towards projecting, I think. Yeah.
What I'll do, if you can give me a quick second, is to just modify my audio settings.
Sure.
Yeah, maxed out. Thank you everyone for being here today, and thanks to Becky for interpreting this. I'll be reading 4 short poems, and my congrats to the Fiddlehead team for this wonderful issue. I'll start with the poem called The 7 Deadly Sins. And the last line modifies from a poem by Kelly Russell Agodon in the collection Hourglass Museum. The 7 Deadly Sins. 1. How far did we think we could jump? Even objects in low orbit, seemingly afloat, are constantly falling. 2. I am living in the afterlife of betraying my own will, cut down, burst open, spilling shekel moons. 3. How did our plant, neglected by my brown thumb, become carnivorous? Our thing did not die, it became hungry. 4. Our carnassial blades of chlorophyll did not mean to be cruel, or did they? 5. If I enter a dervish of toxins, the grasping tentacula, the swing ride of poisoned fruits, the tuliform, will I extract an answer? 6. The ship is taking on water. The ship is going down. The captain is staying on the ship. I am the captain. I am the ship. 7. Do you still love me, you ask? Yes, I reply, as if I'm lying. Next poem is called Collapse. There are ungrouted grooves where my wanton waits. I am alarmed by the built-up force per unit area of my hydraulic grasp. It could crush any non-god. I keep returning to the image of a pack of starving dogs. I am unsure that my yearning is safe for your approach, but I need you to touch me. My hunger has discovered agriculture and spawned other hungers. I am a whirlpool of acidic mouths, but I need you to kiss me. Is there a similar weight I could disappear for you? Do you need me to navigate an apron of hammer mills to get to you? How terrible will the gravitational music be of 2 black holes collapsing into each other when all they have left is that risk? The third poem is called Armada. We're not going anywhere. If we were, the towers we build against heaven, idling like rockets receiving coolant or fuel, would have taken us to new worlds. Towers must be the answer. The reason God famously said, "Let us bust their union." Our babble is fading away at last. We all speak American now in these unclear silos, subdued by the reptilian screams of espresso machines. Cometh now a new Nimrod to captain our ships, to find God for us in an evening stroll elsewhere, and ask them some questions. And the last poem I'll be reading is called Shelter. We've invented the whitest white paint, a shine to repel the witness of the sun. Soon it will adorn townhouse complexes and boulevards where guillotines of hung windows await the neck. With dollhouse greens and HOA beiges, these are national cakes. And if you believe in such things, also rewards for the faithful. Beach houses are the calcium levees of the excess dead. The resourceful have found use for so many bones. That they're sunk now like Archimedes means that oceans must rise. The new marsh of color-coded pickets will forbid sleep, even with lockjaw skin on the duvet of morning. A penumbra, an after-image of tarp and cardboard cities lingers around the opulence. After the pulse that repeals electricity, some of us will still have IKEA train tracks for wood, and crayons for candles. In that beginning, foil blankets wrapping meat within, we will wait for the shadow over our shadows to lift off the high thread count embrace of sleep, hoping to remain space dark behind the taped glass eyes and cheekbone wounds of our estate, safe from our neighbors. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tolu. It's really wonderful to hear your work in your voice. I don't know if you could hear the thunderous applause in the room for actually all three readings, but I hope it's coming through here as well. Yeah, so I'm going to welcome our fourth and final reader. This is the winner of this year's Creative Nonfiction Contest for her creative nonfiction story, Silkworms, Jenny Hwang. So we're really, really happy to have Jenny here tonight. Jenny Hwang is a Korean-Canadian writer and mother. She has previously worked as an immigration lawyer and in refugee resettlement. Her writing is nurtured within a community of writers forged through her involvement with Firefly Creative Writing. She lives with her family in Mississauga, Ontario. Please welcome Jenny.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'll be sharing an excerpt taken from the middle of Silkworms. Our necessity of communicating in the shortest, simplest phrases instilled the habit of interpreting my parents' words into what made the most sense to me at any given moment. Sometimes, your grandmother was a good writer meant she had beautiful penmanship, as I imagined her sitting on an ondor floor, practicing brushstrokes with an ink brush in hand. Other times, I've imagined her writing lovely letters to loved ones overseas, a woman with a knack for words, like the way my mother asked my father to write the cards when we attended special occasions, like the way I could write a well-worded email to a friend. But today in the kitchen, I decide to ask my father what he means exactly. She wrote, he says. Wrote what? I ask. She just wrote. She was a good writer, he says. I think I see a flicker of annoyance for being asked to clarify. A few days later, my father places a pile of paper into my hands. Here, he says. Ah, this is what he means, has meant. My grandmother was a good writer. Here. My Korean is limited, and my grandmother wrote in an older vernacular. I am like a preschooler trying to read the King James Bible. Summer and fall pass quickly. It is winter now, nearing a year into the pandemic. My grandmother's papers seem to have only moved from my father's drawers to mine during the last several months. My fragmented mind, occasionally feeling guilty for their untouched state. The days have shortened and it is cold. The kids have more energy than the bones of our house can hold, and I am beginning to feel the cracks. But I have started to write more when I can find the time, a deep source of consolation that keeps me going. I start to look for someone who can decipher my grandmother's words and finally find a wonderful translator on Upwork. One night, a document lands in my inbox. The atmosphere around me thickens and blurs. It is only me and my grandmother's words that are clear. As I read, it is like she is speaking to me through a loop in time. Her voice as real and loud as my children in the next room. Remember me, she says. Hear my story. Her voice is not stern and stoic like I have always thought it might be. It is soft and warm. It is pleading. The first of my grandmother's writing to come back to me is titled Meditations on a Silkworm. I read through it and come to realize that at one point in her life, my grandmother was involved in sericulture, the practice of cultivating silkworms for the production of silk. As I read her piece, it feels like I am learning to breathe for the first time. all the emotion and openness I have thirsted for, sitting before me in her words. This is as much a lamentation as it is a meditation. I hear her trying to make peace with suffering and loss, with her disappointments and her questions. The life cycle of the silkworm has 4 stages: egg, larva, cocoon, and adult silk moth. In places where seasons change, the cycle starts in spring, when the silk moth lays its eggs. 10 days later, the eggs hatch and tiny silkworms emerge. The silkworms grow and molt several times as they feed on mulberry leaves before entering the next stage. This is where the magic happens, where the silkworms spin themselves into silk cocoons with a strong single thread that can measure up to a mile long. It is this thread, when wound with thread from other cocoons, that becomes the precious silk fiber that has been cherished and venerated for thousands of years. My grandmother describes how year after year in spring, the silkworm comes to visit her, how they recognize each other like old friends. She writes about providing meals to the silkworm and cleaning its waste, of protecting it through the cold nights and warm days, and keeping it safe from predators. She describes how the silkworm soon settles down to cover its entire body with thread and dangles like a flower as white as winter snow. She describes the silkworm as a creature to be emulated, a creature who gives and gives and gives, sacrificing everything for humans and gaining nothing in return. A creature who clothes kings and queens in fine garments, and whose body is used to nourish poor men and children. Your talents are unmatched by any creature of this world, she writes. But tell me, what sins have you committed in your past life to sacrifice everything for us and gain nothing in return? In traditional sericulture, silkworm cocoons are boiled while the larvae inside are still alive, so that the silk threads can be harvested without being broken. I sense the ambivalence she feels with this practice in her writing. And I also note the ambivalence she feels with her own situation, feeling forgotten by her children and grappling with old age. Unearthing of grief or sadness was something to be feared and avoided in our house, a Pandora's box that should never be opened. Most likely, the inaccessibility was very real, the untampered need to keep going at all costs. Through death of loved ones overseas, store robberies, and family illness, it was stoicism and silence that kept everyone safe and kept us moving forward. Expressing sadness while we were treading water would have been ludicrous. And now, here it all is, sadness personified. My grandmother cries her sorrows out onto paper, transforms her tears to words, and sends them down 2 generations to give me strength, so that I know that I am not the only one who grieves what is wrong and what is hard, and that it is okay to feel. I know now that my grandmother was left a single mother to 4 children during the Korean War. Her husband and eldest son separated from her forever once the borders between North and South Korea were made permanent. What is there to boast of in these developed societies that have been poisoned with greed, societies still dictated by the law of the jungle, where the strong prey on the weak? A silkworm leaves its silk and body, but a human leaves nothing. I will not overlook the truth I have found in this tiny creature, this generous being. She writes with sadness, but also solace. She finds comfort in her silkworm friend, whose life she sees as even more self-sacrificing than hers has had to be. And with that, she takes courage and arrives at acceptance. I think of all the struggles my grandmother must have faced against the life I am situated in now. I think of the independence and freedom that women have, and how isolating and relentless it has all become. How do I continue forward, standing on my grandmother's shoulders? If my grandmother's work was acceptance, can I dare to move towards something more? It's hard to imagine what that looks like. These difficult early years of child rearing exacerbated by the pandemic. Early in 2021, the New York Times came out with a series on the current crisis of American mothers, entitled it The Primal Scream. They opened up a hotline that would record 1-minute calls from mothers sharing their experiences. The recordings were stark. Women screaming at the top of their lungs, crying in despair, and venting their rage. It was deeply resonant with my own experience, with the times I had run into my car to scream myself, beating the steering wheel until the palms of my hands were red and raw, screaming at the impossibility of it, the demands of the world, of children, of family, and my complete inability to meet it all. I wonder if we had infinitesimal hearing, if this is how the silkworms sound, as they are being boiled alive, or if they have forgotten to scream at all. Sericulture over thousands and thousands of years have so completely domesticated silkworms that the larvae have lost all of their pigment and the adult silk moths can no longer fly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Okay, so we have a few moments to spare here for Q&A. So yeah, I guess I'll just open it up to the room and or the chat and see who wants to come forward and ask a question to one or maybe more than one of our authors. I guess I'm gonna have to look at the chat. Is anyone in the room? Maybe I'll go to the room first, and then anyone in the room have anything they want to ask Fawn and or the virtual readers?
I can ask something. If that's helpful.
Yeah, Sue has a question. Lovely.
I'm thinking of the poets, and I was struck by the strength of the endings of poems in both cases. Maybe take my mask off so I can.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought the endings were very, very strong, and I wondered if you could both maybe talk about what makes a strong ending for you, or what it feels like when you're there, or like how you know you're there. I mean, if the prose writer, I know we didn't hear endings really, but prose writers could also speak to that.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's start with the poets, and then maybe someone else will come up with a question for the prose writers. I think that's a good way to go. Yeah, so Fawn and Tolu on endings of your poems and what makes a good ending to your poems. Either of you want to go first?
I don't mind unless Tolu wants to go first. Okay. I think for me, I think that's a great question. It's something I think about a lot. The most important thing for me is not to have a punchline at the ending. I think sometimes I am or have been guilty of that. So to close a poem but not have too much of a bang. And I just try to keep that in mind when I'm writing. But I'm also new to poetry, more or less.
What's the problem with punchline?
What's the problem? Yeah. I think sometimes it feels easy to have a poem sort of delicately constructed and careful, and then all of a sudden there's something very funny. It almost betrays, or not funny, but very meaningful and blunt. I think it betrays the reader in a way.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, you really have a theory there. So I'm very happy that I'm very happy to have heard it. Yeah, totally.
Thanks for the question. I don't think of it in terms of punchlines per se. The analogy I would use is walking out into the woods to pick firewood, and you set out and you don't know what kinds of sticks you'll find or what kinds of pieces of wood you'll find, and you continue to accumulate them. And at some point you have a nice bundle. And I think the ending is like laying that down. There's that feeling of relief that I get when I can tie it up and sometimes surprise myself. The endings of mine that I enjoy the most are those that I never saw coming, but that the poem insists upon. Sorry if that's a non-answer, but I try to feel where the poem wants to go, and I lay down that burden, as it were. And when I feel that release, I know I'm done until I write the same poem again in 2 weeks.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, and yeah, the firewood analogy was very compelling to, at least to me, and I think probably to others as well. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so maybe the prose writers, Jenny and Corinna, I don't know if you want to build on this, if either of you wants to build on this, or if you, yeah, what do you think? Endings. You don't have to. We could switch gears if you prefer.
Endings are hard. I don't think I have a very firm answer, other than only some sentences sound like endings. So sometimes I just have to keep going and going and going until I hit on the rhythm and the tone that feels right for that particular story. And I think it is more about tone for the ending than for any other spot in the story. I think sometimes a strategy is to end on an image too, something that resonates, but isn't a punchline. Like I think Fawn's comment about steering away from punchlines is important for fiction also, because you don't want it to feel like a neat and tidy bow, right? But I say this as someone who really struggles with endings, so maybe Jenny has something better than I do.
That's lovely. Yeah, I feel like if we're not struggling with endings, then yeah, then perhaps we're not doing something right. I think the struggle is good, is worthy. Yeah, Jenny.
I mean, I struggle with endings. I have a few pieces that I sometimes feel like I need several months to end the pieces I work on. Like it's not resolved until, even for me, until several months later and all it comes. So it's a struggle for me.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Also struggling with endings. Can I see the chat somehow, or?
Joanne's monitoring the chat.
Oh, Joanne's monitoring the chat. Okay, good. Yeah.
There are no questions yet, but I've
no
invited.
questions in the chat. Okay. Good. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that we were being.
Yeah, I've invited them, but there's nothing yet. I'll let you know.
Okay, good. Yeah, sounds good. Good to know. Okay, great. Any other questions from the room here?
What about beginnings?
Great question. I was going to pivot to central images. So good. Do we want to go for beginnings? I mean, Corinna, like the beginning of your story certainly was super striking. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that beginning and how that came to you. And yeah, so maybe Corinna and Jenny can start us off on beginnings. Particularly Jenny, I'm also thinking about sort of the origin story of this story, which has its own fascinating story and rich story as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about the beginning. So the beginning of this story that I read is one of the few stories where the beginning changed for me. Usually I actually start with the first sentence. It's my favorite way to start a story. And it almost always ends up staying as the first sentence. But this one, Gerard Byrne, who is a wonderful editor in this process, suggested that I move things around, which actually unlocked something in the story that was problematic. So the story initially started with the line that comes later that says, where is it now? What she loved most about Missioner was his rice cooker. That was my original first line, and for the longest time that was where it started. And it wasn't until the final sort of editing stages that things got moved around a bit. So yeah, I like starting with an image or a line or something that's kind of curious and starts the reader questioning right away. That's often how I like to start. So I find beginnings easier to answer maybe than than endings.
Lovely, yeah, that's very well put. And also, I did find that rice cooker line, particularly when you read it aloud, you could really hear that opens up a package, right? That rice cooker line is very effective and sort of, I like the way that at least that sub narrative in your story sort of falls off that line as well. It's super well done. Yeah. Jenny, would you like to speak to beginnings?
I'll speak next to the beginning. I mean, I like what Tolu wrote in the chats, like next middles, because I think I like the middle. And I think it has to do with the themes I'm trying to just grapple with in my writing. Being stuck in between, the next generation with my children, and then my grandparents and my parents, and the old history of Korea that we've left behind, and being somewhere new. And so there's these themes that I'm working with, rewriting the history of the Korean history narrative that I've been brought up with what might have really happened, and themes of gender, things like that. So I feel like I'm in the middle, and that's what happened with Silkworms was, discovering my grandmother's writings. It was kind of the middle. This is the middle of the story I'm in. And so when I worked on the Silkworms piece, and then started to think about, okay, what's the bigger story? And then went to the beginning, and then went to the end. So that's what happens for me. And then I think with the beginnings, it's in terms of my nonfiction, looking to the origins of how this is coming forward in my story. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lindsay Wong, who was the contest judge for this story, and who we're very grateful to have done that, pointed out the way you sort of balance temporal strands very expertly in this story, right? As well, yeah. And I'm so curious about this, the fascinating and grotesque revelation of the boiling of the silkworms, right? And how that came to you, and how that sort of came to carry so much weight in the story as well. It's a really powerfully manipulated sort of scientific moment, right? So you're welcome to say more of that or not.
Oh yeah, okay. I mean, the research of the silkworms was I was just really fascinated. I had no idea this was part of my grandmother's history. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, why is she talking about silkworms in this piece? I don't understand. And then honestly, it was watching so many videos of communities doing this work, like cultivating silkworms, reading a lot about the history of it, and more getting into what actually is happening in that. And it was fascinating to me. I had no idea. And then, as you write, sometimes I think Tolu had said something about like surprise. It's you get surprised by what comes out, and that's what happened for me. So. Yes, well, it's fascinating as well for the reader, and it's surprising on the page as well. So I think surprise is certainly something we can take away from tonight. Any other questions? We may have time. Okay, Jamie, yeah, we have another question here from Jamie.
Hi, so I have a question for Jenny about the caterpillars that show up in your story. Was that just like a really funny coincidence that while you were working on this story about silkworms, there's this little moment in the middle of the pandemic where these caterpillars enter your children's lives, watching them raise those? Or was that an image that kind of was there before the crafting of this piece began?
So it was interesting. Like I was working on the silkworms piece and I got stuck. And so I stopped, and then, a week later, just thought I wanted to write 500 words. And that came out like just something that we had done over the summer with the children. And then later, again, for me, it does seem to be several months where I have like it comes together, and seeing like, oh, because I noticed, okay, there's similarities, but wasn't sure if that, if they could fit together. And later on when I was trying to craft it together, it did come together really well. So that was really a great experience for me to have that come together. So